what you've observed over the years is how important the data is for snowpack, not only in California, but really all over the world. So in your experience, just take me through your progression about researching what was going on with measurement of snowpack and then kind of where you guys are now.
Right. Yeah. So I was recruited to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory from the University of Utah, where I was a professor of snow hydrology in 2010. And it was specifically to build the capacity to map mountain snowpack wall to wall. So touching every square foot of snowpack and measuring its depth and its snow water equivalent. Um, with the understanding that we were going to start with an airborne version, and then it was NASA, and so it was go to space, and so we started out with the test bed of building this Airborne Snow Observatory, um, and um, and so we first started our measurements in 2013, and we thought that, oh, this is a drought year. We'll go back up from there. And in fact, no, it just kept declining. And so we had 2015, so the record low year. Um, and but even through all of that time, it became clear that having that full measurement suite across every basin and across all of those basins is absolutely critical to be able to know how much actual water you have. And what we were doing was filling in a huge gap in our knowledge of the mountain snowpack. The way that it has been done for the last century is with the snow courses, with the snow tubes that get plunged in, pull those up, weigh them. It's a really accurate measurement, but the area of the basin that it covers is that big, right? And okay, you have 10 of those along a transect. Okay, well, it's about that big, right? It's a tiny, tiny proportion of the basin that's sampled. Now, the good thing about those is that they are indicative of how much snowpack there is and how much runoff there's going to be, but they're not super accurate. And as time has gone on from the 1920s, when our population was quite small and the agricultural demands on water were small, and then the environmental demands on water were also small, right? All of that, we've gone from that all the way to this time where our population is enormous, and we have all of these demands to where we're down really to each water drop that that matters. And as an example of this, the last time that we had a profound drought, other than the one that we are still in right now, even though we've got this huge year, the last time was in the mid 70s. And during that time, California had half the population it has today. So a lot less demand on the water supply. Now we are in a place where we are just supremely bound to knowing every water drop.
Going back to the somewhat now considering what you guys are doing and the accuracy, you guys are saying about 98% accurate, right? Hold on. You guys are saying about 98% accuracy on what you think is up there versus actual water that can make it into some of these reservoirs or down the line, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So so by measuring all of the snowpack, right? So we, with our lasers and spectrometers, we touch all of the snowpack in the basin. And so by being able to add that all up and also knowing where it's distributed in the mountain basin, the water managers that we work with, all the way from the California Department of Water Resources and the National Weather Service to irrigation districts, farming entities, etc., they are able to now know early in the season, okay, if there's, for example, in the Tuolumne Basin right now, we just delivered data. There's a little over 1.9 million acre feet of water up there. And they can know now that at a bare minimum, they're going to get 1.9 million acre feet. In the past, they had to hedge with the simple measurements that there were, and they didn't really know. And so they couldn't get aggressive about saving water, releasing water, generating electricity, knowing how much water is still up there, and mitigating against flood releases. Now, with our quantitative measurements and those accurate measurements, they can know to within about 2% how much water they're going to get as a minimum. Now, it is always the case that there can be more precipitation that will come. And so that may bump up those numbers, but we go out and we fly again, and then we quantify that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can then bump up their numbers, and they can keep adapting to it. So it's taken the job of a water manager from being one that is just heavily laden with stress in the spring to and horrible uncertainty, to one in which they really are making more targeted decisions about what they're doing, because they have the confidence as to how much water they have in the snowpack.
Now I'm looking over your website and I see a name. Now I know the name because I'm a meteorologist water guy, but you have the ringing endorsement of Frank Gerke. So for people that don't know, for decades, he's the guy with the DWR beanie that walks out with the snowshoes right off 50, and he's jamming the snow stake in, and he's weighing it, and he's doing all that. He believes, and I would imagine it would be hard to look to the future for someone that's done the same thing for so long, and he believes that what you're doing really is the future of snowpack surveys and really estimation, at least in one dimension of the water, for the future. What did it feel like to get his endorsement?
You know, it was great. So I had known Frank for probably about 2 decades before we started ASO. It was in the winter of 2011 that I gave him a call. So we had just started things at NASA, started building it up. I gave him a call and I said, Frank, I really think this is going to be important for your quantification of snowpack and runoff. And what do you think? And he immediately said, Tommy, I think you're right. And they ended up then, out of that very conversation, out of the first conversation, they ended up putting together about one third of the funding for the research development. So the state of California has been invested in this from the very beginning, and it allowed us to attend to the water management needs at the beginning. NASA is a research organization, and what we were really doing was filling the void in the science knowledge of the distribution of snowpack. But that relationship with Frank right off the bat allowed us to flow immediately into applications, immediately into operational water management, and getting the right partners involved right from the beginning, and ultimately having them work with the data and show the value right off the bat.
Yeah. So the 3 points I want to touch on is number one, what we're seeing a lot more is just the strict accounting of what's coming in and accounting of what could be going out. You know, I'm seeing a lot of great stuff from Scripps. They're flying the Hurricane Hunter, so they're really trying to get before these atmospheric rivers hit, you're getting that part of the equation, what's coming in. Then with your data, that's what's up there, so they can actually, because what we hear number one all the time in media is, why are they releasing all this water when you know we're going to need it? Tell me how with your data, are they changing some of the equations? Are they changing some decisions, feeling more confident that they have the water available to replace what may be going out?
Yes. Yeah. So what this has allowed, so in this year, we've had an enormous amount of early snowfall, and then we had a bunch of runoff, reservoirs coming up, and then now they know how much snowpack is up there, and our our meetings with the water managers that we have on a weekly basis, they keep communicating to us their concern about rain on snow event. So for this atmospheric river, and what's the snow line going to be? How much of that mass is going to come off rapidly? How much is snowpack going to absorb of rain? And so yeah, they are really concerned about that. But to your point, by us quantifying to within 1% of how much snowpack there is and how much water there is, that is allowing them then, when they have to be aggressive about releasing water, to preserve dams, to keep them from blowing out, to keep communities from flooding dramatically, killing people, destroying infrastructure. They can now be very prudent with it, very measured, very surgical about what they're doing. That is a completely different world for them. And at the opposite end of the spectrum is last year, intense drought. And so in general, you would think they would want to hold on to as much water as possible. The Hetch Hetchy team, so on the Tuolumne, the water supply for city of San Francisco and other municipalities in the Bay Area, their number one metric is to hold on to water and fill the reservoir. And last year, even though it was an intense drought year, they knew how much water they had waiting in the snowpack, how much they had in the reservoir, how they were going to fill it. And they were able to provide releases for environmental flows in Yosemite National Park down the Tuolumne that otherwise would have been completely impossible. And so it is to do that kind of action in a drought year, completely unheard of, unless you actually know how much you have. So it's a different world.
Getting to one of the big concerns about, I can't even remember when it was. It was the Caldor fire, right? And the Dixie fire, same year. And I know you guys fly on those basins now.
Right.
So the perception was this is going to change the snowpack, how it collects, how it melts. We have something called albedo, which is crucial. How is that going to interplay? I know you've got some interesting things to say about that. So measuring snowpack in the era of mega fires, what are you seeing out there?
The mega fires are really a part of who we are and who we've been from the very beginning. There had been the King Fire in the Tuolumne just before we started flying in 2013, and the Creek Fire over in the San Joaquin, the Dixie Fire in the Feather, the Caldor Fire in the American, and up and over into the Truckee. And so the first thing is that those fires change dramatically the vegetation canopy cover, and so burns off the canopy, and so you're left with a greater ability for there to be snowfall to the ground instead of it being trapped up in the trees and then sublimating, so functionally evaporating from ice. And so there's more accumulation that way, but there's also more accumulation of black carbon or soot falling off of the trees that have been scorched and immediately reducing what you just described, the albedo. And the albedo is the reflectivity of the snowpack. And so the way to think about this scenario is you have a pile of salt and then you sprinkle pepper on it. And the fact that you can see the pepper is the sunlight being absorbed there. Well, out in the snowpack, the black carbon falling onto the snow, you can see it being absorbed, and that is immediately handing off energy to that snow and melting it. So it melts it dramatically faster. And so we've seen this in the Creek Fire scar. We saw it last year in the Dixie Fire scar up in the Feather. We saw just tremendous drops in the snowpack um, in during melt periods because of that black carbon, and not nearly as much in the areas that haven't burned. And so we measure the snow albedo from the plane. So not only do we have LiDAR, which is functionally a laser pointer, rapid fire laser pointer, about 500,000 pulses a second, but we also have imaging spectrometers which measure the reflected sunlight in about 500 different wavelengths or colors, and that allows us to quantify how much sunlight is being absorbed by the snowpack, and in turn how fast it's going to melt.
The final one sort of point I wanted to hit, and then we'll finish up here, is what we know, right? Let's just take the last 100 years. Objectively, in general, it's getting warmer. We're seeing some of the biggest impacts at higher elevations as far as like the amount of warming, warming absorbed in water bodies, like the temperature of Lake Tahoe is coming up. There's a lot of things happening at once. 10, 20 years from now, with what you've seen so far, some of the big things that I've heard is the snowpack melting earlier and the snow level being in general higher. If you take it over, say, a decade time span, there's going to be moments like this year, but are you seeing that? Does your snowpack surveys, do they reflect that in California and even other places too?
You know, so if we look at what is happening in this time of a changing climate, we have moved from the linear warming to the time of nonlinear. We're getting to where the temperatures are going to climb more rapidly year after year. And how that plays out with snowpack and precipitation is wild extremes. And we see that going back before our measurements, just going back to the snow courses and the snow pillows. We see that the standard deviation from year to year is starting to swing harder and harder, bigger and bigger extremes than what we used to have before about the 1970s. And so the other aspect of the warming, the way in which it really impacts snow melt and accumulation of snow versus rain, is in the temperature of the precipitation itself. And so with this storm that's coming up, we're going to have a high snow line. It's otherwise known as a high rain line. So up to 8,500 feet, we're supposed to see a substantial amount of rain. And that falls and immediately runs off. It's no longer snowpack. And or it can fall into the snowpack and be sopped up to a degree, but also carve off some of that snowpack. The great thing about the period we've been measuring in, so the last 11 years since we started the program at NASA, and now that we've moved out, is that we have seen the worst year on record and a couple of top 2, top 3 years on record. And we may be heading for this to be even bigger than 82, 83. We'll see. But we've seen the extremes there. But what this has really told us is that instead of relying on models that you have to calibrate over 30 years, we need to know what's happening in this year, and we have to get it right in this year. And that is what requires then these physical measurements, these very accurate and spatially complete measurements, to ultimately be able to take care of forecasting runoff and managing the water resources in every year, because every year matters, especially with these wild extremes that we are experiencing, and we're going to see more and more.
Right, because you don't know when the next big water year is going to be. It might be the very next year. It might be more than a decade away. You really don't know.
That's right. That's right. We're in a war, really, at this stage, with respect to water and the climate. And so we need to have the best intelligence and the best defenses in that war that we possibly can have. And we just, the team I have, I feel really fortunate to have them. And we together feel really fortunate to get to participate in this time and contribute in this time with our best efforts.